Humans have existed for at least 300,000 years. Much of that time we have spent on this planet is a mystery, with no written records to refer to. Unless some evidence in the future comes to light, the dawn of human civilization began at around 10,000 BC. Societies, cities, cultures, mathematics, and writing stemmed from our sudden development from hunter-gatherers to farmers and builders. In this series, I'm going to look at each millennium from 10,000 BC to modern day and examine the major events that shaped who we are today. Today, we are starting all the way back from 10,000 to 9,000 BC. So without further ado, let's begin. The period from 10,000 to 9,000 BC represents a massive leap forward in human history, often described as the dawn of the Neolithic Revolution. This millennium, nestled at the end of the Pleistocene and the beginning of the Holocene epoch, witnessed significant changes in human lifestyles, social structures, and relationships with the environment. Humanity transitioned from predominantly nomadic hunter-gatherer societies to the earliest experiments with sedentism, agriculture, and domestication. These developments, unevenly distributed across regions, laid the groundwork for the complex societies that would emerge in subsequent millennia. The period from 10,000 to 9,000 BC coincided with the end of the last glacial maximum and the onset of the Holocene, a warmer and more stable climatic phase. The retreat of glaciers and the expansion of temperate zones reshaped ecosystems, creating fertile landscapes conducive to human settlement. In the Near East, the Fertile Crescent, a region stretching from the Levant to Mesopotamia, benefited from increased rainfall and the proliferation of wild cereals like wheat and barley. Similarly, regions in East Asia, such as the Yangtze and Yellow River valleys, saw growth of wild rice populations. These environmental changes provided abundant resources, enabling human populations to experiment with new ways of life. However, the transition was not uniform. The Younger Dryas, a brief cold snap around 10,800 to 9,600 BC, temporarily disrupted warming trends in some regions, stressing human populations and possibly accelerating the shift towards food production as a buffer against scarcity. In contrast, areas like sub-Saharan Africa and parts of the Americas remained heavily reliant on hunting and gathering, as local ecosystems did not yet support domestication. The interplay between climate and human adaptation was thus a defining feature of this period, shaping divergent trajectories across the globe. One of the most significant developments between 10,000 and 9,000 BC was the emergence of semi-permanent and permanent settlements, particularly in the Fertile Crescent. Sites like Jericho in the Levant and Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey provide evidence of early sedentism. Jericho, inhabited by the Natufian culture, featured stone structures and evidence of communal storage, suggesting a community that relied on abundant wild resources, including cereals and game. Göbekli Tepe, with its monumental T-shaped pillars adorned with intricate carvings, challenges traditional narratives as it appears to have been a ritual centre built by hunter-gatherers before widespread agriculture. This suggests that cultural or religious motivations may have driven sedentism, in some cases, rather than purely economic ones. These early settlements were small, often housing a few hundred people, but they marked a departure from the mobile lifestyles of early Paleolithic groups. Sedentism allowed for greater investment in place, such as the construction of durable shelters and storage facilities, and fostered social complexity. However, not all regions adopted sedentism. In areas like the Eurasian steppes or the Australian interior, nomadic hunter-gatherer lifestyles persisted, tailored to local environments where mobility remained advantageous. The period from 10,000 to 9,000 BC is often associated with the origins of agriculture, though full-fledged farming systems were not yet widespread. In the Fertile Crescent, the Natufians and their successors began cultivating wild cereals such as einkorn, wheat and barley, and managing wild herds of goats and sheep. Archaeological evidence from sites like Abu Hararia in Syria show a gradual shift from harvesting wild grains to intentional planting, with morphologically domesticated seeds appearing by around 9000 BC. This process was slow and experimental, driven by a combination of environmental pressures and human innovation. In East Asia, particularly the Yangtze River Valley, early cultivation of wild rice is dated to this period, though domestication was not complete until later. In the Americas, proto-agricultural practices such as the management of plants like squash emerged in regions like Mesoamerica, but hunting and gathering remained dominant. Animal domestication also began in the Near East, with goats and sheep showing signs of human management by 9000 BC, as evidenced by changes in bone morphology at sites like Zawi Chemi, Shanidar. The shift to food production had profound implications. It allowed for greater food security and population growth, but also introduced new challenges such as labour-intensive cultivation, soil depletion, and dependence on specific crops. These early experiments set the stage for agricultural economies that would define the Neolithic. Technological advancements between 10,000 and 9000 BC supported the transition to sedentism and food production. The development of ground stone tools, such as querns and mortars, facilitated the processing of grains as seen at Natufan sites. Sickle blades, often made from flint with glossy edges from cutting grasses, indicate harvesting activities. These tools reflect a growing specialization in food procurement and preparation. Architecture also evolved, with the construction of stone and mud brick structures at sites like Jericho, the use of plaster for floors and walls, as well as the creation of storage pits, points to increased investment in permanent settlements. At Göbekli Tepe, the carving and erection of massive limestone pillars demonstrate advanced stoneworking skills and communal labour organisation, suggesting that technological innovation extended beyond subsistence to cultural expression. In regions where hunter-gatherer lifestyles persisted, technologies like microliths, small, versatile stone tools, remained prevalent. In coastal areas, such as the Jomon culture in Japan, early pottery emerged, used for cooking and storage, marking another technological milestone. These innovations, while regionally specific, collectively highlight humanity's adaptability during this period. The shift to sedentism and early agriculture reshaped social structures. In hunter-gatherer societies, small egalitarian bands were common, with flexible leadership based on skill or experience. In contrast, early sedentary communities, such as those in the Fertile Crescent, show signs of increasing social complexity. The construction of communal structures, like the towers at Jericho or the sanctuaries at Göbekli Tepe, suggests collective labour and possibly emerging hierarchies or specialised roles such as ritual leaders. Kinship likely remained the primary organising principle, with extended families forming the core of new settlements. However, the storage of surplus food and the control of resources may have introduced new social dynamics, including competition or inequality. Burial practices, such as the Natufian custom of interring individuals with grave goods, indicate status differentiation in some communities, though evidence of rigid hierarchies is limited. Gender roles during this period are less clear, but likely varied by region. Ethnographic analogies suggest that women played significant roles in gathering and early plant cultivation, while men may have focused on hunting or herding. The labour demands of sedentism, such as building and processing food, likely required cooperation across genders, fostering interdependence within communities. This millennium also saw rich cultural expressions, particularly in the Fertile Crescent. Göbekli Tepe's elaborately carved pillars depicting animals, humans, and abstract symbols suggest a complex cosmology, possibly centered on ritual or communal identity. These structures indicate that symbolic behavior was not just a byproduct of agriculture, but a driving force in social organization. Artistic expression also flourished in other forms. Natufian sites yield small figurines, often of animals or humans, and decorated tools, reflecting a growing emphasis on aesthetics and meaning. Cave art, while less prominent than in the Upper Paleolithic, continued in regions like Europe, with engravings and paintings depicting local fauna. Burial practices provide further insight into cultural beliefs. The Natufians practiced secondary burials, removing skulls and sometimes decorating them, suggesting ancestor veneration or spiritual connections to the dead. These practices hint at a worldview that linked the living with the supernatural, a trait shared with later Neolithic cultures. In regions where hunter-gatherer lifestyles persisted, cultural practices were often tied to mobility and the landscape. For example, the Jomon in Japan created pottery with cord-marked designs, possibly reflecting group identity or ritual use. These are just some examples of the creativity and adaptability of human societies during this period. While the Fertile Crescent led the way in sedentism and agriculture, other regions followed distinct paths. In East Asia, early rice cultivation laid the foundation for later agricultural societies, but hunting and gathering remained prevalent. In sub-Saharan Africa, mobile hunter-gatherer groups exploited diverse ecosystems, with no evidence of domestication during this period. In the Americas, groups like those in the Andes and Mesoamerica began managing plants, but their economies remained mixed. Europe, still recovering from the Ice Age, saw hunter-gatherer communities adapting to forested environments, with sites like Starcar in England revealing sophisticated use of resources like deer and fish. In Australia, Aboriginal groups maintained a nomadic lifestyle, with complex oral traditions and land management practices that preempted later developments. These regional variations put a spotlight on the diversity of human adaptations, driven by local environments and cultural priorities. The Neolithic Revolution, while transformative, was not a global phenomenon by 9000 BC, but its seeds were sown in key regions. The transition from a hunter-gatherer society to farming and agriculture brought challenges. Settled communities faced risks like disease from living in close proximity and reliance on limited food sources, which could lead to malnutrition if crops failed. The younger Dryas may have exacerbated these risks, pushing communities to innovate or revert to mobility. Social tensions also emerged. The control of surplus resources could lead to disputes, and the labour demands of building and farming strained communal cohesion. In some cases, as at Göbekli Tepe, ritual centres may have served to unify groups, but they also required significant resources, potentially straining smaller communities. The period from 10,000 to 9000 BC was a spark for human innovation. The experiments with sedentism, agriculture, and domestication laid the foundation for the Neolithic societies that followed, leading to urbanization, writing, and complex civilizations. The cultural and technological achievements of this period, from monumental architecture to symbolic art, reveals a species grappling with new possibilities and challenges. This millennium also underscores humanity's diverging paths. While some groups embraced sedentism, others thrived as hunter-gatherers, demonstrating that there was no single path to progress. The legacy of this period is not only in the technologies or economies at birth, but in the enduring human capacity to adapt, create, and imagine new ways of living. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.